We are storytellers by nature, sharing with others what we experience, perceive, and believe of life, our joys, adventures, our losses. We tell ourselves stories as well. Some leave us trapped by false beliefs and self-doubt. But there are also stories of persisting, exploring, and rising above. Stories of uncovering the truth, enabling powerful transformation and triumph. These are those stories. These are your stories. Hello, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is time for, and so it is, stories of truth, transformation, and triumph. It is a glorious day today, truly. My name is Zoe Miro. My pronouns are he and him. As a spiritual counselor, a religious science practitioner with the New Thought Media Network, and as a transformational coach, my ministry and my mission are to help people to co-create their most authentic and most fulfilling life experience. As always, I'm honored to bring this show to you the first Saturday of each month, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. If this is your first time here, great to have you here. And if you're returning, it's good to see you again. Each episode of this show will allow you to hear how people like you, people like me, who have been held back by false and limiting beliefs, were able to uncover their truth, which enabled them to transform their life experience and then triumph, not in spite of, but because of their journey. There's a quote that's attributed to Lao Tzu that says, "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear." That describes how I met today's guest. I was taking a course with the incredible teacher, Reverend Dr. Michelle Wadley. And as she so often does, she asked that we find a prayer partner for the duration of the class. Well, I was paired with this minister from Olympia, Washington, and we just jibed with one another, continuing to be prayer partners once the course was completed, and it's now been, almost 2 years. We've been meeting weekly. We pray with and for one another. And I have been blessed to learn so much more about myself and about life in general as he ever so gently nudges me towards exploring those things I have ever so cleverly hidden from myself. Let me tell you a bit about him. Rev David was licensed as a minister in 2010 and having served at 3 other communities, and found his home in Centers for Spiritual Living, CSL Olympia, where he serves as their senior minister. Rev David has co-chaired the CSL Global Themes Team, and he's taught online classes for the home office. His joy is teaching and supporting people in a deeper knowing of the oneness within. Folks, I give you Reverend David Robinson. Welcome, sir.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. We usually do that by phone, so it's very rare that we actually see each other. So
that's true. That's true.
See and be seen. Thank you.
Well, it's an important way for us to compare beards.
Yes.
All right. So what we want to do is to understand where this journey that you'll be taking us on is going to start. So what time, what place, what can you tell us?
Well, it starts with the name of the delivery nurse who delivered me when I was no, it doesn't start that way. So, but we kind of talked about looking at a sort of a whole life experience. So it begins in my childhood, if you will. And like many people, I had a bit of a rough start in childhood. And when I was 8 months old, I was put into an institution, a nursery, if you will, but full-time for 3 months. My mom was sick, and so couldn't take care of me. So I developed this sort of abandonment, betrayal, and I've done something that unknowable wrong sort of set of beliefs about myself. that I have to say that here in my mid 70s, it's taken me a while to clear out still. And there's still little vestiges of that running through once in a while, but that's been part of the journey. And so that was, I kind of grew up in this household. It was dysfunctional, angry and abusive mother, kind of an absentee, mentally or emotionally absent father, parents who really just hated each other's guts. And meanwhile, I'm falling in love with Jesus. I was raised a good Catholic boy and was an altar boy and was, focusing on the Sacred Heart and all that, having these deep spiritual experiences, and then this kind of messed up, home life. And the nuns were, of course, famously not the nicest people to be around either at school. So there's this sort of a yin yang, black and white, dichotomy, hot and cold dichotomy going on in my life.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and attended Holy Redeemer Grade School and North Catholic High School. This high school burned down the year after I left, and none of us admit to setting the fire. So, and I was one of three children. I had an older sister who was 10 years older than me, and one who's a year and a half younger than me. So that's kind of my background, that I grew up in kind of just a working middle class neighborhood in Portland. As an adult, I went back and looked, and we actually had the largest house in the neighborhood, which didn't register when I was a kid. It was just our house, so, but, and there was good stuff to it. And then a lot of it was covered over by this kind of umbrella of anger, not doing it right, fear of doing it wrong, punishment, and, believing that I wasn't really wanted. So, so that was
talk a bit more about what beliefs came about for you and why you believed them.
Well, like I said, when I was put into the nursery, it's like, as an 8-month-old, we form most of our beliefs when we're 8 or under, or less. And so we don't have this perspective. We don't have this intellectual ability to look in this and say, I didn't really do anything about that. That's just, that was my mom's stuff, You don't get that until you're an adult and get some perspective, and sometimes not even then. So, they form, the brain tracks are laid down, and the emotional habits are, formed and stuff like that. And so a lot of it was, like I said, just not feeling good enough, not feeling like I must have done something wrong to be, put out of the home and away from my, my, at that time, mother's love. And so a whole feeling of kind of betrayal on the human level. So, and of course that has a feeling of never being good enough. I was a very intelligent student. I was very good at school, and so I was my mom's prize, child because of that. But never enough. It's like, whatever I did was never enough of an accomplishment. So, which was her, I guess, way of pushing me into more, but it was not a very comfortable or pleasant way. There was no celebrating of accomplishments. My mom didn't even go to my high school graduation. She said, "I've done enough work for you. I'm not going to your graduation." So, that sort of, sort of stuff. Yeah. So I'm doing that. And then in the middle of, I'm 13 years old, and a couple of significant things happen then. Are we ready to move into that area for a moment, or
no, please?
Do you want to ask anything? Okay. So one night I'm just sitting there washing the dishes, and all of a sudden had this, what we would now call a mystical or numinous experience. I'm just, as my framework was at the time, immersed in the love of Jesus for 1 to 5 minutes. I'm not sure what it was. One of those out of body, completely transformative, wham experiences, and just being in it. And I remember when I kind of came out of it, I was just like, what the heck was that? And I remember I walked into the living room, my parents were sitting in there, and like I mentioned, they hated each other's guts. So one was sitting in a little pool of light in the dark room reading their newspaper, and in the opposite corner of the room was the other one reading their newspaper. And I remember looking at them and going, can't talk to them about that. And I didn't feel like I could talk to any of the priests or anybody at, the church or school about that. So it's just there was this explosion that had happened that I didn't know how to process, didn't know what to do with. And then around the same time, I had applied to the seminary to become a Catholic priest, and got turned down for that, which today I'm very glad about, but at the time, of course, was very disappointing. And I'm suspect the reason was my parents didn't have the money to put me into, through seminary down in your neck of the woods, actually, Oakland, is where that was going to be. So anyway, so I'm having this, kind of whole light, dark, experience, deep spirit, frustrating human experience. And kind of out of that, it's like I watched my life for the next, few years during high school, during my teen years, fall apart. And my dad died suddenly when I was 16. And like I said, we hadn't been really close anyways. But it transformed the dynamic of the household. So my mom was really angry at men. So I was becoming a man and he was gone. So I was it. And so that happened. My belief in the Catholic Church was beginning to fall apart. This is the Vietnam War era and the late 60s, with all the transformations and shifts that were happening in the world at that point in time, all the questioning that was going on. And so I like to say that by the time I came out of Catholic high school, I was an evangelical atheist. There is no God, and I'll preach that to anybody. And I was pretty depressed. I made 2 suicide attempts, one right before the start of my senior year, and one right after my senior year. Tried to hang myself both times and failed, and then felt miserable because I couldn't even get off the planet, decently. So it was a very, I look back, my friends changed during that period of time, from hanging out with all the smart 4.0 kids to hanging out with some kids who were kind of outsiders and stuff. And I was acting out. At the time, I have a cousin who's 4 years older than me. He was promoting rock and roll music, rock and roll concerts in Portland. So I'm hanging out with The Doors and, Eric Clapton and Blind Faith and all these people that are, I'm 16 to 18 years old at this point in time. So these are like the, oh my God, mega stars. There's a game called Two Truths and a Lie where I say I had breakfast with Eric Clapton, lunch with Stevie Winwood, and dinner with the Doobie Brothers, and the lie was Eric Clapton. He had just met a hot girl the night before. And when we were meeting for breakfast, he said, I'm going to breakfast with her. And I looked at him and said, I would too, and so, but so I have this happening over here on the side, so home life and school is frustrating as heck. Here's all this. Here's this spirituality that sort of exploded and then collapsed, and all that dynamic. And so it was very confusing. It was very emotionally traumatic, of course. I'm still working on the nothing I ever do is right. One of the other dynamics was kind of, I was the oddball kid who was off saying mass in the basement while my friends were out playing baseball. So I'm into this stuff that nobody else really is into, and felt isolated. And I became very comfortable being alone, which is a dynamic that still goes in my life. But having social friends and connecting with people was still a very challenging thing for me at that time, and that's been kind of one of the patterns that's run through a lot of my life. So
this feeling of not belonging.
Yeah.
And yet when you were hanging out with like the rock and rollers, did you feel that you belonged with them?
No, because they were passing through doing concerts. I didn't belong with them. But it was fun to hang with them, So it wasn't a place of belonging. It was just, these are, cool people passing through my life that I get to be a little part of their world for, a few hours or a few days, depending on, on the thing.
How did that affect your sense of self-worth?
Oh, it was in the toilet. It was absolutely in the toilet. Because I didn't belong at school. I didn't belong at home. I didn't even belong with the rock and roll community. I didn't belong anywhere. So it was like I was just kind of isolated. I had these, couple of friends, but like I said, they were the not belongers also in the school. And, that was the 2 or 3 people that I felt I belonged with. But they weren't really, they weren't the highest and best friends, let's just say, to be hanging and belonging with. They weren't bad kids at all. It wasn't like we were doing anything. I was smoking a little dope at that time, which for a nice Catholic high school in Portland, Oregon, in 1968 was a really major crime. So I got kicked off the track team for smoking, and fortunately they didn't know what I was smoking. And that was my acting out that I was doing. So that's kind of, so I was in this soup of not belonging, not feeling worthwhile, feeling betrayed by the universe and by my home life, and not knowing. And so that's kind of where I was by the time I was 18 years old, graduated from high school, and tried one more time to hang myself. And suicidal ideation was a factor for probably till I was 55. I had to make an agreement with myself that I would wait 24 hours from the time I first had the urge to before I took any action on it. And it was my way of checking out. When I was young, I wanted to leave because I wanted to be close to God and close to Jesus. It's like, just, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I want to be there, But by the time I was 17 and 18, it's just like, I just want to get the F off of here, So, yeah.
Yeah, when you feel like you don't belong, it's pretty difficult.
Yeah. And at the same time, I'm sitting here taking classes in school that are the intellectual classes. So I know I've got this brain, this smarts, and kind of like, it's like you got a Ferrari and there's no place to drive it, there's nothing to do with it. It's just there, so, and the same with the spiritual experience. I had this Ferrari of an experience and I don't know what to do with it. So, and that to me just was part of the whole catharsis of, what was going on within me. Was I knew there was something there, but I had no idea how to connect it to life itself. And that can be a very frustrating experience.
Absolutely. All right. So you are in the thick of it.
Yes.
Something changed.
Oh, lots changed. So probably the first actual step was when I was my first year of college. I went away to college, got out of that house, and went to an almost all guys college, Oregon Technical Institute down in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I wanted to be a car designer, so I went to work on automotive, and that helped me to hang out with a different environment and away from my abusive mother, and away from that, lots of nuns and a mother who's angry at men and like that, to hang out with guys and do guy things. I got my first motorcycle, and stuff like that. I stopped, smoking dope for the most part, and because the college is at almost a mile high elevation, and it was a boring place to be. I arrived with hair down to here and bell-bottom jeans and love beads and all like that. And all the kids there were mostly kids off of small Oregon towns coming in to fix their daddy's tractors. So there was a cultural conflict there. And I quickly found the people who I belonged with and the people who I really, really didn't belong with. So it was interesting. I got taken under the wing of a few guys down there, which was really kind of the first time I felt that, being supported that way. And then what really started to shift was I left there after a year, and I went to Portland Community College, and I was in the middle of an art history class and fell in love with Chinese brush painting. And the teacher handed me a book that said, in order to understand brush painting, you have to understand Taoism, the Chinese philosophy of Taoism. And so I started reading this, and it's just like suddenly here's this cosmology that made sense to me. See, the problem with me being an atheist was I had this experience back there when I was 13, and it's like I knew there was something more. It wasn't that God that they were teaching about in the Catholic Church that likes you and doesn't like you, and if you're not a baptized Roman Catholic, you're going to hell forever. It wasn't that. I knew it wasn't that. But I knew that there was something. And so this gave me a way of approaching life and seeing a cosmology that started to work for me. And so I remember I used to hike through up in the Columbia River Gorge, up above the falls, the trails there, and up in the Cascades, and with this book in my backpack, and I'd go find a stream and away from everybody. There wasn't much was hardly anybody hiking up there in those days anyways. But I'd go walk up a stream, take off all my clothes, sit on a rock and read this book, and I still have it. It's still got water stains all over it. And it's been clearly in a backpack a lot of times and stuff like that. But it really started to shift me into something new. So from that, and from reading then Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, to the great Taoist writers, I started to teach myself meditation and started to practice meditation. And eventually I moved on from there into discovering Zen Buddhism, which, is a logical progression out of Taoism. And started, and this is in the mid to late 70s. So you've got, Alan Watts on the radio, and
Mm-hmm.
I moved to LA and had Jack Garris on the radio, and was reading D.T. Suzuki and all these, wonderful books. And while I was in Los Angeles, I took a class from a Zen Buddhist priest teacher. And I walked in knowing that I knew a lot about Zen Buddhism, and walked out knowing that I knew nothing about Zen Buddhism. And it's quite a shattering of what I thought I knew, and in a good way. He was a wonderful person. It was a wonderful experience, but it was just one of those, oh my God, sort of experiences. So I was starting to have this. I was starting to find places to be, to embody that spirituality, to where I could start to live in it a little bit. I was spending 2 to 4 hours a day doing meditation. I'd had an old girlfriend that had made me this humongous beanbag chair, 2 colors of purple velour on it, and I'd sit in there for 2 to 4 hours, a day doing meditation, and so and just going deep. And so it was a very rich time for me spiritually, and so that's kind of what started to transform my outlook on spirituality. And to this day, I still, I consider myself very influenced by Taoism. In fact, I'm doing a talk series this month on embracing the light and the dark. And so tomorrow I'll be starting off with, among other things, the yin and the yang, the daijitsu symbol of the balancing of the light and the dark energy,
Mm-hmm.
the active and restful energies. And so it's still something that really influences me, and has for 50 years. So that was one of the things that started to shift. And as you know, in life, when you're doing life, there's a shift that happens over here, and then it touches off a shift that happens over here, and then something else happens over here, and then you do a U-turn and come back, and then you take a side trip and stuff like that. So to say that there was a shift is not, I can't say that.
Mm-hmm.
But the next shift was that, so by this time I was living in Los Angeles and having these fabulous, deep spiritual experiences, and couldn't pay the rent. And I remember I finally had a friend of mine. I was a photographer by this time, and working with the Sierra Club's camera committee. And this woman had paid me a compliment on my photography. And I said, oh, it's not very good. I was still in that very low self-esteem. I'm not worth much and stuff. And she looked at me, and I didn't know this until later, but she had just graduated EST. And she looked at me and she goes, I would like to just tie you to a chair and gag you and do nothing but pay you compliments for an hour. And so that you couldn't say anything to put them down. Because apparently I had this pattern of anytime anybody said anything good about me, I would just, deflect it, put it down.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I remember I looked at her, and just kind of as an observation, I just said, but I would still just deny it all in my mind. And that was something that was a wake-up call for me. It's just like, I can't even let this in. And that's where I started to realize, there's something not right with that process. And so about a month later, if she had asked me to go to S at that moment in time, I probably would have said yes, but she didn't. But about a month later, I had a longtime friend who was talking to me about this personal growth seminar that she and her husband had gone to. And the husband showed up in LA one day, said, can I take you to breakfast? And the minute I saw him step out he was working for a shipyard, and he was driving the old beat up white pickup truck from the shipyard, just wearing white jeans and white t-shirt, nothing fancy. But the minute I saw him, there was something energetically. I just looked and I went, whatever he's got, I want it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just bam, like that. And so we had breakfast. He talked about this personal growth seminar called PSI World. And I was at the next guest event. I was And I still to this day have no idea how I afforded it, but I was at the next foundational seminar that they have, the basic seminar that they had for 4 days. And that really shifted my self-esteem and my life in a whole lot of ways. And so that's the thing that really started to then, I learned how to use the mind for visualization, affirmation. I learned how to use the psychic sense for, they taught how to heal people from a distance and to work with healing energies. And then just the self-esteem. It takes guts to stand up there in front of 350 people and kind of spill your guts about stuff, and be loved and received.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gravitated to that seminar group for 5 years, and felt a real sense of belonging and being appreciated for a lot of the time that I was involved with that. I was never quite in the top tier, which is the people that had a lot of money, and I never did. But my life started shifting and shifting and shifting. I got my first long-term relationship. I was kind of a late bloomer in terms of relationships and women. And so my first kind of long-term relationship, and just stuff started to shift, and I could start to see a path for myself as a teacher to express that. And even though that didn't open up in that particular venue, it's like this dream started to unfold a little bit more. And so that was a big, huge shift for that. So I did that for 5 years. After all, I got tired of the constant push of sell, get more people in, get more people in, get more people in. And what in your consciousness just created that whole traffic jam in Los Angeles that made you late for our meeting. And I started to say, this feels a little more like the Catholic Church and guilt tripping than it does, what I really wanted. So I kind of stepped away from them, and I'd done a couple of other things during that time. God, I can't remember his name, but it was a creative musician that created DMA. That was what it was called, course. And so I'd studied that, which appealed more to the creative side of me, the artist side of me, also. So I'd done quite a bit of really intense, deep work during this point in time. 6-month long programs, year-long programs. I remember they started. I was in a 6-month-long program, and we were told that when somebody asks you how you're doing, say "great," and I couldn't, because I was mostly, back in those days, if you asked me how I was doing, it was hanging in there. Oh, I'm all right. Yeah, very kind of depressed. Basically, it was, I have this sad sob story that I really want to tell you, and I want you to listen, but I know you're not going to listen. And that dynamic. So we finally agreed on, I could say, good. And I remember the couple times I was asked, out and about, how I was doing, and I said, good. I got nauseous, because it was just so not me. And that's the thing with transformation, is you're suddenly not the old you. And so it doesn't feel comfortable. Transformation never feels comfortable. The caterpillar does not feel comfortable dissolving into the no-thingness, into nothing soup, so that a butterfly can emerge. So that was part of my caterpillar dissolving, butterfly starting to emerge phase with that. So anyways, I had... and by the way, 6 months later, I was walking through a client. I had a whole new job. I was walking through a client's place, and somebody said, "How are you doing?" And I just, without even thinking, just said, "Great." And I caught myself. I went, "Holy shit, I am doing great." It's just like, I'm making more money than I have in my whole life. Well, that's not quite true. My first job, I made a lot of money, and then I left it. But I'm making more money than I made in a very long time. I lived for 2 years in Los Angeles without a car, just a bicycle to go between 2 jobs. And so I finally had a car, I had a girlfriend, and I was feeling a whole lot better about me and more purposeful about me than I ever had. It's just like, I really am feeling great. And it was interesting to watch how shifting the mind and just the willingness to even get up to good was enough of a step to lift me up to something new. Lift me up to where I could move from good into great. Thank you, Jim Collins, for that wonderful book. But from good to great. And so it was a visceral experience of that process at work. And again, this is over 5 years. This is not an overnight, I read a book in 2 days and my life changed. This is I mean, stuff happens, but this was an ongoing practicing, daily practicing, visualizing, affirming, hanging out with people who are reaffirming this and in this kind of a mindset and being respected and feeling like I belonged in that. So, and to me, that's how transformation is we don't do transformation solo. We experience it internally ourselves, but we don't do transformation solo. Life does it with us, or we do it with life by choosing to align with that. And so that was a conscious choice, was to take the seminar and then get involved with the seminar, because I knew people who went once and said, oh, that was kind of a nice experience, and you never saw them again. But for me, it was like, I was at that basic either as an attendee or eventually a staff person for several, probably 15, 20 times, and did a couple of their advanced seminars, and like I said, took their various year-long programs and workshops and things like that. So you were going to say something.
I was going to ask you if there were people from any part in your past that got to see how you had changed and what they thought of that.
No. It was interesting because that cousin that I mentioned about the rock and roll promoter, out of that and went into photography, and I worked for him as he and his two partners' first studio assistant, and it was a horrible experience, to be perfectly honest. And he was abusive, verbally abusive, and I worked overtime at straight pay, and I'd taken a cut in more than half in pay from the job that I'd been working at prior to that, and I would work 36 hours straight through, days, three times. And it's like, don't tell anybody that you're doing this. And his name for me was Shit for Brains. And,
nice.
And so, I moved to LA, and when I eventually was back in Portland, I ran into him in a restaurant, and it's just like, I decided I'd cut him out of my life. I did not want that in my life. I couldn't resonate with that anymore. So did he see it? Yeah, but not in a way that he perceived it. So, so no, nobody from my past really saw that.
Now, the reason I ask is that it's not at all uncommon for people who go through a transformation to find that other people don't appreciate the transformation that much.
Yeah. My good buddy from high school, when I first moved to LA, we'd been hanging out, and we were doing letters back and forth. He loved to write, I loved to write. So we do these 7-page letters back and forth. This was, way before email or anything like that. And stuff like that. And after a while, it's just like, I got tired of his victim stories, and I saw them as that, and I realized that. And so it's, basically all my old people that I knew fell away. I was in therapy, and my therapist recommended that I go to my 20-year high school reunion just for healing. And it was interesting. I went back, and I hadn't changed physically a whole lot, since then. And some of the jocks by that time were bald and fat, and they're 20 years. So I was 38 years old, and looking like crap and stuff like that. And so it was more healing, but it's just like, I didn't relate to anybody there. I hadn't had a good time. I've had, recently people try to invite me to come back to I think it was the 50-year reunion, whatever it was. And it's just like, no, I spent 4 years. It was just 4 years of my life with a bunch of people, kids that I didn't relate with and haven't stayed in touch with since. And I don't feel any connection there. I don't feel any great desire to go back. I don't have anything I have to prove. I had the funny experience of I moved to Hartford, Connecticut, as I mentioned, when in my early 20s, and they called to do a 5-year reunion. And my mom knew that I was driving an Italian sports car that began with the letter F, and all she'd ever heard me talk about was Ferraris. So she said, no, he's in Connecticut working for Aetna Life and Casualty, driving a Ferrari. It was actually a Fiat, but she didn't know that, so, but that was a little bit of satisfaction of, the kids made it good. So, but anyway, so after the transformation, I haven't, nobody from the past has seen that. And that's the thing I find, that as I progress through life, it's like there's people who fall away and people who fall away and people who fall away.
Mm.
One of the interesting experiences I had stepping forward a bit was when I came here as a minister in Olympia. I had a good friend who had known me in CSL Seattle, where I'd hung out for a good 20 years, who's another minister, and contacted me and was going to show up for the first Sunday that I was there as a minister. And she made a comment to me that I realized that she was dealing with the me of 11 years prior to that.
Mm.
And I said, I'm not that person anymore. And she got it, by the way. And we've remained great friends, ever since then. But it's like we have these people, held in, this is where you were, and I don't let go of you being that way. And it's the challenge that people have when they go back, home for their families, is family has you in this certain role, in this certain way of being, and it's hard for them to break out of that. This past Thanksgiving, I had a moment where I was feeling sad because I don't have any family to go spend Thanksgiving with. And then I went, thank God I don't have any family to go spend Thanksgiving with. I listened to these tales of the aunt who's wondering when you're going to get married, and the uncle who's the political extreme on the other side of where you are, and all this weird dynamic. And it's just like, I got to sit home peacefully, have a nice day listening to some classical music, watched a little football, just kind of hung out, had a nice salmon Wellington for dinner, and got to just enjoy. And like I said, I'm very good at being alone. I learned that when I was a kid. So and it does bring out that I don't belong a little bit, which is a pattern that I'm still dealing with, but getting better at.
So a lot of what you were talking about in your early life had to do with not being able to relate to other people, not being able to feel that they related to you, not relating to yourself even.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hearing this incredible shift where you really started to enjoy who you are.
Yes. And one of my mentors a long time ago said, find a tribe that wants what you have to offer. Mm. And I've found various tribes through my life that want what I have to offer, and I want what they have to offer. And so there's this more of a sense of belonging. And it took a while. I remember, so to continue that story slightly, so in 1988, I'd stopped going to the personal growth seminar. I'd gotten married. I had a young child. My wife and I decided to move to Seattle because we didn't want to raise the baby in downtown San Francisco. No shade on your current place, but
that's quite all right. I wouldn't want to raise a child in downtown San Francisco either.
Yeah. And it was a lovely place to be as just a couple, with no kid, but it wasn't for a place for raising babies. So anyways, we moved the circumstances, the seas parted, and she got a promotion to their office in Seattle, got a promotion out of it and a raise. We moved up to Seattle together, and I found a better paying job than I had in San Francisco. And this is 1986. The cost of housing in Seattle was still low. So we owned our own home within a year after we moved up there for $94,000, a nice 3-bedroom house in a nice area of Kirkland, Washington, which is a nice area on the east side of Seattle. And so, but the marriage after a while started kind of not feeling great, and the job started not feeling great, and I was just feeling blah in my life. And so I called up the wife of the guy who had gotten me into the seminar group to talk to her. We'd stayed in touch, and we'd always had this real close connection. And she said, you need to check out a religious science church. You need to find a religious science church in your area. And she also recommended a book to me that by a woman named Sandra Ray called I Deserve Love, which was basically a book of affirmations about love. And I wasn't all that impressed with the affirmations about love, but at the back of the book was a description of a process called rebirthing, and which was a breathing, clearing process. And lights, sirens, bells, and whistles went off in my head when I read that description. So within 2 weeks, I was in a religious science church, and I was starting rebirthing. I'd found a certified rebirther and was doing that process. And so, I look back, and I was working on the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual aspects of my life between those two things all at once. And and it shifted. And I was going, 250 miles an hour full speed down this path, kind of like I had with the seminars. It's just like, I want this. There's something here that I want. And eventually my wife did not do rebirthing and said that she was really into church for meeting people. She wasn't really into the spiritual aspect of it. And so we found that we really didn't have a whole lot of area of connection, communication. And so I found I wanted something more than that. So I finally left that marriage and went wandering in the desert for many years after that, maybe a couple of decades after that. And but being in religious science really, it was a way of looking at the world that aligned with my Taoist cosmology very much. I aligned with the use of the mind of the personal growth seminars very much, and sort of put it together in a cohesive way that I really appreciated. And so I started with a small church. It eventually folded, and I moved over to the big church, which was CSL Seattle, which at the time was only about 350 people. It grew to about 12 to 1,400 people on a Sunday, in a few years. But I got involved there. I brought in I had some AV training, so I became their sound tech, one of their sound techs for Sundays for a while, and got involved. And I remember two things when I was doing sound tech. Number one, I kept hearing this little voice saying, "You're on the wrong end of the microphone." It's like, you're supposed to be up there. And the second one was actually when I was at they did a summer camp over in Seabeck, Washington, which is over in the Hood Canal. And I would run the sound for that. And they were talking about family, and I suddenly realized hiding in the sound booth was my way of being the kid who was separate off in the corner, doing his own little thing and letting all those other people that I didn't belong to be part of it. And I remember I officially resigned from being a sound tech at that Seabeck conference. I said, I want to be in the family, not hanging back here behind the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a huge awareness, and it was a huge realization. And, and I was welcomed, of course, with open arms. From their perspective, I already was part of the family. I was just the part of the family that ran the sound, But for me, it was a step out from hiding behind that. And that's something I've noticed. I used to be a hardcore bicyclist, and would lead rides for people. And one day it dawned on me that one of the reasons I led rides was so that I didn't have to be back in the group trying to have conversations with people. It was a way of staying a little bit separate from and in charge of, the whole thing. And so it was just one more way of not quite kind of belonging, but not quite really just letting go of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say that there are times as a minister that I feel the same way. And so it's just interesting to watch that dynamic is still playing out, and I'm still becoming more aware of it and finding ways, there are people and places where I do feel that I can sit and belong and be with, usually other ministers and prayer partners and stuff that I can just let my hair down, and this is who I really am. So it's interesting to watch these early childhood dynamics still playing out, nuanced, shifted, but still playing out. Krishna Das, the chanter, one time I was sitting in a chant group with him, and he said, we bring our personality to our spirituality. We perceive our spirituality through our personality. And so here's this just pure spirit, but we perceive it through our set of beliefs, our set of glasses, our set of, whatever we're perceiving. And so my journey these days is more and more and more to become aware of how clearly am I perceiving? What old glasses, what old patterns am I bringing up that I'm still looking at this way? And how can I start to shift out of it? Because by now, I know that none of that is true. It's all BS, as I like to say, which is belief system. And also the other, yes, it's both. And some of it stinks still. So it's looking at that. So slightly continuing on my journey. So I got into religious science, moved over to Seattle. 10 years later, I finally decided I wanted to be a practitioner. I've been kind of feeling nudged a little bit, but I'm not good enough. I'm not one of them. I can't, I'm happy as a congregant, And I took classes and classes and classes and classes, and was TA for many classes. In fact, by the time I got into practitioner studies, you have to have taken certain classes within 5 years of
Mhm.
the time you started. And I had taken those classes as a student like 8-10 years before that. And I was now a teaching assistant in those classes. And I remember there was one that I literally was the teaching assistant. And as I started practitioner, and I was told by home office that I had to go back and take that class again. So the teacher just said, do a little tiny bit of homework, and I'm just going to write off that you completed the class, because you're literally, helping to teach them. So, so that's how long I've been at it. So eventually I went through prac studies. That was a wonderful and challenging transformational experience. And I won't get into the details of that, but it was a powerful process. I came out of that, and that was kind of I'm at a level where I'm comfortable. I don't have anything else. I'm a happy practitioner. I was starting to see a fair number of clients, and having a semi, healthy income from, that process, and also having the feeling of, excuse me, supporting people, teaching classes, facilitating programs at the center. So, I got involved and recognized and like that. And then while I was right after I finished prac, I got married to my second wife, and dang, if she didn't have this burn to be a minister. And she was a year behind me in practitioner studies. So as soon as she got finished with that, she wanted to look at that. We went to an informational meeting about ministerial school, and I remember driving. And like I said, I was good. I was a happy practitioner. I didn't need to go any further. And I'm driving home, and I can remember the exact spot on the 520 bridge where I went, why wouldn't I be a minister? I was the kid who was building altars in the basement, saying mass when my friends were out playing baseball. I was the Taoist, the Zen Buddhist. The spirit has been at the center of my life, for my whole life. I mean, yeah, I've done all this job stuff, and I've done all this other stuff, and but it's all been about God, spirit, whatever you want to call it, the Tao, all through my life. When I was doing photography, it was to catch the Zen essence of what I was photographing. It's like it's been, and it's just like, why wouldn't I be a minister? And so, some people say they get the call. I got more of the if you're an NCIS fan, you get a 10 slap, from NCIS. It's like, wake up, hello. So I went through ministerial school. Like I had the usual kind of like, I'm 55 years old, going back to school. Can I do this stuff? And ministerial school is it was a master's level program. And so you're studying classical Greek philosophy, you're studying comparative religions, you're studying dynamics of leadership, you're studying all these 18 or 20 different topics, plus the more local classes of how to actually do ministry itself. And so it's a challenging program. And I loved it. I thrived on it. The student in me from my early days, kicked back in. It's just like, I love this. I love being a student. I love studying this. And so, finished that, got licensed, and the marriage fell apart. And this was the love of my life. This was the ministerial partner for the rest of my life. And within 6 months, it was just trashed and fell apart. And so I had this whole dream that just collapsed on me. And but what I find is when we're in transformation, the universe supports us in that transformation. And so, I woke up on January 1st of 2011, and I just knew I am ready for my ministry. I literally said it out loud to Spirit. I am ready for my ministry. And it was an inner knowing. It wasn't me trying to force it to happen. It's just like me speaking what was already being felt inside of me. A month later, the wife said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. A month later, my cousin, that same cousin, and I had gotten back together. He's mellowed since then, so we've become good friends. And he had a house on the Oregon coast, so I could go live in that. We were living in Roseburg, Oregon at the time. I could live in that house for a month and walk on the beach and cry and scream and process and do all that grief work. And at the end of that month, I got invited to go candidate over to church in a little tiny town in eastern Washington named Clarkston, Washington, and got hired there. Started April 1st, April Fool's Day, which I always thought was kind of, appropriate. I always think spirit has a sense of humor. I have a sense of humor, so God must have a sense of humor. And was there for 3 years, and got to do healing of grief from the marriage, and learning about ministry. From there, after 3 years there, I realized I wanted more green and more water and like that. So I ended up in Redding, California, of all places, through another kind of like odd little coincidence conversation that said, why don't you do this? And by the way, I'm totally connected with the people from that church because I used to be the minister there. And I found myself being the minister in Redding for 3 years, which was another growing experience. And after 3 years, this center in Olympia was looking for a new minister. And I love the Northwest. And so I applied for that. And I've been here for 8.5 years. And one of the metaphors that I use is when I was in Clarkston, Washington, I bought a Japanese maple in a pot. And I took it home and I set it on the back porch in my rented home in Clarkston, and then moved it to Redding in ever larger pots, kept it on a porch. Never quite felt like I wanted to plant it in the ground. And 6 months after I got to this place, and there's a whole manifestation process of the home I live in that is beyond our time frame probably. But 6 months after I arrived here, I went, this is the place to plant the tree. And so it's still sitting in my front yard, thriving and doing well. And I've been the minister here for 8.5 years, which is longer than all of their other previous ministers and longer than any relationship I've ever had in my life and any job or career path that I've ever had in my life. And so to me, that's the transformational aspect of, and it's not that there aren't still challenges and stuff and dynamics showing up and like that, but I am home within myself. And I am home within that spiritual sense that I know I'm in the right place. And I still feel there's transformation happening. There's more coming.
Mm-hmm.
There's more wanting to be birthed through me, if you will. But it's not from a place of, oh my God, I'm in the wrong place. I got to get out of here. It's more from, no, I'm in the right place and something more, even more is coming out. Since we're dealing with an infinite presence, the good is infinite. And so it just keeps on going. There's an old Zen saying that when you reach the top of the mountain, keep climbing. And so that's what I feel like I'm doing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to use the idea of being able to look out at the horizon, and from where you are, you see the horizon being here, and then you move forward, and the horizon is there, and you move forward, etc.
Yes.
And that is the beauty of transformation, and that is part of the triumph. That comes from transformation.
Yes. Mary Morrissey talks about hiking with a friend of hers who was a little ahead of her on a trail going up and was up the trail a little ways and said, look at this beautiful lake. And from where Mary was, there was no lake. She couldn't see a lake. It did not exist in her consciousness. But by walking up a little bit higher, there was the lake. And so that's, like you say, that's the triumph of transformation is if we'll keep on doing the walk. And that's the if. In my talk tomorrow, I said, the Buddha did not achieve enlightenment by hanging out with his buddies sipping chai tea. He did the work. Jesus did the work. All these people did the work and went through the transformation process. Rumi didn't come up with those brilliant poems by just hanging out. He had to leave his whole previous life as a scholar, which his dad wanted him to be, behind, and fall in love with this guy that broke his heart eventually, in order to come to this whole new life and new way of being that's left him somebody that we still quote hundreds of years later for the wisdom that he has. So it's the transformational process. It moves us along, but we have to work with it. It's a co-creative process.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was talking about the yin yang, there's the light and the dark, and both are necessary. They're interdependent on each other.
Very much so.
A lot of us are not willing. We first met in a workshop going through the shadow stuff.
Yep.
And a lot of people are not willing to go into the shadow stuff. And yet that's where the richness is. And that's also where the growth and the transformation comes from. Because until we see and bring the light of our consciousness into our shadows, we can't grow. So
That's just absolutely beautiful. And in the beginning, when I said that I had found a wonderful teacher in you, I most certainly meant that.
Thank you.
Most definitely.
Thank you.
It is just a joy to see that the spirituality is not linked to any specific dogma. It's not linked to any specific way of reading or of seeing things. It's this innate truth.
Yes. That's what I love about religious science is it says it comes from all these different streams. What's the essence? What's the element of it? But I read religious science books. I read Mark Nepo's Book of Awakening. I do some Hindu chanting. I'll read the Tao Te Ching or some Taoist writer. It's like I pull from all this, because to me it's all so rich. I'll read philosophy. A friend of mine and I joke about going down the rabbit holes when we're research when we're preparing talks. So, yeah, there's no one way, but there is each of our way that reveals itself. Rumi has a wonderful quote that the path reveals itself as we walk the path.
Yeah. When I was going through prac studies, it seemed that no matter what assignment I had, it always took me 5 times longer because I'd go down all these rabbit holes. It's like they'd mention, a quote, and I was like, well, I had to go and find out about that.
Right.
Where did it come from? What was the context?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. We're almost out of time, but any particular final words?
Listen to your spirit within and follow it. The thing that holds most people back is they don't see the how. I want to do this, but I don't see how I can do it, so I just cut it off right there. And I believe that the infinite mind, the infinite wisdom, not only gives us the idea, but also shows up with the way to do it. When my wife and I decided that we wanted to go to ministerial school, we realized it was going to, over the 4 years, cost us about $50,000. And we didn't have that kind of money that we knew of. And so we went and saw a financial planner, and my wife had a settlement from her first marriage that included her husband's retirement account, a $250,000 retirement account from his employer. And so we went to this financial planner, and she's literally crying, saying, I'm not even sure we can keep the condo and how we're going to do it. And I'm looking at the financial planner, who also went to CSL, by the way, and she's like looking at all this paperwork about this thing and looking at my wife and looking at me, and like clearly it's like something's not registering. Eventually she found there was $50,000 in cash, not associated with any IRAs or limited ways of accessing it. The exact number, $50,000, was just sitting there. We put it into $5,000, $10,000 CDs and open them up, once a year. And so that it's like the means will show up if you will say yes and start walking the process. I can't tell you how many times I've signed up for classes that I didn't know if I could afford them, only to have the money show up or the way to be in the class show up. So that's the thing, is listen and then start to walk, even if you don't even completely know where you're walking to.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rev David.
Thank you. I'm a minister, so give me a microphone and I'll just keep on babbling for a long time.
All right, well, folks, as I've said before, this is your show. So if you'd like to be a guest, share your journey from limiting beliefs to transformation and triumph, by all means, let me know. zodimiro@gmail.com is my address. And remember, triumphs aren't necessarily world-changing events, but anything that elevates your life, anything that brings about a greater experience of life for you, that is a triumph. And that's what we're looking for. So by all means, let me know if you'd like to be a guest, and please share this video. Let people know about this. All right. So we are just about done. Perfect timing. Thanks again. And folks, I'll see you again next month. Namaste.
Namaste.
All I have to do is find my outro. There it is. But it's got to play.